Well, welcome back, everybody, to the live Sound Studies Symposium. My name is Nick Reeder, and I'm going to moderate this panel. And I'll introduce our speakers as we proceed. And our first speaker is going to be Brett Leonard, Associate Professor at the University of Indianapolis. Brett is a freelancer and a Chief Audio Engineer for the Chelsea Music Festival. His research includes collaborations with Sennheiser, NHK, and Skywalker Sound. He's an alumnus of California Lutheran and New York universities and holds a PhD from McGill University. His talk is entitled Developments in Systems for Live Sound Training. Thanks very much and welcome, Brett.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited that this is all being put together. I missed about half the first session because I was teaching, but it's good to be here. So I will just quickly share my screen here. Don't know if we need a lot of this this stuff on the screen here, but I figured, especially for system diagrams and things, it might come in handy. But this is something we've been toying with since right before the pandemic. The idea kind of popped up with some of my colleagues and myself, that there was a real disconnect between our students who tended to be recording focused. They were primarily, I'm going to work in a recording studio, that sort of thing. And a lot of them found themselves really liking live production, live sound, that environment, but didn't really have the immediately translatable skills that they needed. They could mix something, but it required 20 minutes on the kick drum and now sound check's over, and that's as far as we got. So it was this kind of catastrophe waiting to happen, and we realized that we just didn't quite know how to get them where they needed to be more competent and be really ready to start getting their hands on gear more quickly. So we looked at a lot of what other institutions do, what I had done, in my education, and we kind of isolated two traditional approaches to getting students trained up. And I'm going to keep saying the word student, but this is equally applicable to any young professional who is trying to gain experience. We've actually started talking to a local sound company that wants ways to create a more streamlined pathway between the warehouse and the gig. So that would work in that context as well. But traditionally, schools of music, music departments, campus activities, whoever sort of programs things around a college campus has events and concerts, and that's great. And those are great sort of laboratory opportunities for young engineers to get their hands dirty and really go through the process of mixing and setting up a system, which is awesome. But it can be really intimidating, especially for a student who's just starting out. You get somebody who's really keen and they're sharp and they show a lot of potential. The hurdle to this might go a little pear-shaped, there might be problems, but you just got to power through it, can be really tough, especially for young students. It's a real dash of cold water with the pressure that comes with a live audience. And for us, we just don't have that much performance that requires amplification. We have jazz ensembles. That's our primary amplification constituency. So we don't have a lot of variety. We just kind of have this core group, and maybe everyone gets one or two concerts a year that they get to be sort of on crew, and especially at the console. The other option is you hire musicians, you sit them in a room, and you say, okay, this is your laboratory now, students. You can do whatever you want to do. There's no audience. These musicians are here to give you what you need. And that's awesome, because then I can hire a bluegrass band one day and a rock band the next day, et cetera, et cetera. but it's expensive, and with the current situation in higher ed, I'm sure most of us probably can relate. No one's interested in a new thing that costs lots of money. And it requires either use of existing facilities that are usually in high demand. Now you have to book up a big performance space for a lot of extra time, or you need a dedicated performance space, which again goes back to money. So we were looking for some way around this. And for us, it had to be low cost and palatable to administration. We needed it to be scalable so we can introduce as many students as we have to this process. And we wanted to make sure that we could execute it in a small environment and remove some of that pressure, especially at the beginning, where we don't want people just sort of in decision paralysis because they're afraid to make any mistakes. And offer a variety of experiences, both in musical material and in the environment. So that was our sort of outset goals. So we, after mulling this over and kind of throwing things at the wall to see what stuck, we decided on some sort of kind of video game-esque virtual system for practicing these skills. We wanted it to be multi-sensory, because nothing sort of takes somebody out of the zone, out of that immediate need for feedback, than removing the visual aspect of things. That's such a strong component of what happens in a live situation. You're watching to inform your decision making. We wanted it to be really portable. You can pack up the system in, and carry it with one person. That's kind of our goal. And we want to be able to set it up in a practice room size space, because that's something that we can sell to an administrator. Say, well, we got practice rooms. If you give us one of them, we can do this. And we want it to be, especially for non-traditional students, we found it's really tough to get people at a set time to do a set thing. So being available 24/7 or on a wider timetable really helps to get people actually to use the system. And of course, we remove all of the studio crutches. I'm a studio guy. I love the studio, but let's be real, undo and play and stop are crutches when it comes to dealing with a live event. So we want to remove all of that and really kind of create this all in one package. So I'll give you a quick system overview because I know we're fast and furious here. So we're in the process of prototyping a system. We're on kind of version 2 now, which is integrating more lifelike control and expanding the library of materials that a trainee can use. So we start with multi-track capture and video capture of live performances. So we try to as faithfully as we can recreate a real live show. At this point, we're capturing a lot of bigger shows in our own performance space, and we're in talks with venue partners off campus who do different genres of music about potentially getting access to their space to do a concert or two of capture. And we capture both the acoustic sound coming off stage, so we hang or hide mics around stage to get a bit of the actual stage sound, especially with things like jazz band, big band, where there is quite a bit of acoustic energy coming off stage before amplification, and then obviously capture every single microphone you would anticipate being on stage. And then we go through and we analyze that for significant events, solos, melody changes. It could be somebody, guitar player turns up too much. That's a significant event. So now you're fighting the other direction. All of that's analyzed and coded as an XML file. And then it all gets fed, audio, video, and this XML file into this Max MSP giant patch that's basically rebuilding a digital mixer. It's I wish it were sexier than that on the sort of operational level, but it's really recreating a digital mixer. But it's providing all of the playback. It's providing synchronization via time code, and it's providing with earcams spat tools. We're doing some binaural rendering to give at least a little bit more immersive presentation, and then videos displayed on a large TV in front of the user. So it's not quite immersive. Eventually, we'd like to get to a point where we're doing maybe augmented reality or virtual reality, but it's better than a tiny little screen where you're sort of squinting to see what's going on. It's a pretty accurate representation, and all the video, I should mention, is captured from the front of house mix position. So at least you've got that very same perspective. It's not something kind of way out of character. And then from there, we play back material and we track exactly what the trainee, what the user is doing. So we're looking at all their fader moves, their pan changes, their mutes, their solos, all that good stuff. And right now there's a bit of debate about whether to include solo, but we'll save that for Q&A in a later date. So the user sees something kind of like this. They see a full stage view. And this particular one, front of house, was set up a little elevated at the back of the hall. And then as significant events occur, if they're not addressed, and they don't have to be addressed to a precise decibel level or with a prescribed sort of remedy, but if they're not addressed at all, if the user doesn't make any changes in response to something that clearly is a significant event on stage, after a certain period of time, we provide locationally linked feedback. So it started as this really stodgy, like, don't forget to turn up the sax solo, and it kind of became this like so you think you can mix video game thing with kind of more cheeky, entertaining feedback, and it's just a nice reminder, hey, something happened, you should be responding. So as all this is evolving, we're still in the sort of testing stage and trying to figure out actually a lot of control integration. Oh yeah, sorry, there's the current physical setup of the system. It's just an 8-channel controller that is pretty, similar to what you're going to find on most digital consoles: faders, banks, solos, mutes, pans. We're trying to expand the material list, and eventually we're realizing we really need to get into acoustic and PA system modeling. That way, okay, so you understand what's happening in this one venue. How does that apply to 10 other venues? We want to really make sure that you're not learning how to react to one space. You're learning to sort of more holistically deal with these problems. And we're trying to streamline user feedback. And then ultimately, hopefully starting in the fall, we'll be using this with students and looking at their progress, their comfortability, their confidence over time, and trying to validate where we're at and see if this is really a useful tool for students. So I know I'm pretty sure I'm out of time here. I was trying to keep it to a nice tight 10 or 11 minutes. But yeah, we've got I think a good handle on this to start, but there's so much work to do. So if anyone's got ideas, thoughts, is interested in being involved, I think as a community, if we all sort of put our heads together on a problem like this, we can probably create something that will elevate the state of the industry more quickly than all of us trying to sort of trudge through years of figuring it out on our own, or our students figuring it out on their own. So thank you so much. I'm happy to take questions, comments, concerns.
Brett, maybe we'll do the questions at the end.
Perfect. Yeah.
That is so cool.
I'm hoping that my students end up better live sound engineers than I was when I came out of school. That's that's the hope. It takes a while.
Yeah, I think that's going to be tremendously useful.
Cool. Well,
Yeah,
thank you.
let's talk. Let's do the next two, and then we'll circle back.
Great.
Okay, great. Let me introduce the next speaker. Jacob Danson Faraday is up next. Jacob is an ethnomusicologist who focuses on working relations on large-scale touring productions and is writing a book about Cirque du Soleil sound technicians. He just started a new post as lecturer in music at Edinburgh Napier University and is currently sitting in an actual castle. Wow, exciting. This talk is entitled Local Stagehands in Large-Scale Tours. Jacob, I'm so psyched you're here because I was the one who stumbled upon your dissertation when we were scouring the internet for live sound researchers, and it's great to see you. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I was thrilled to get that email all those months ago, and yeah, I'm very, very happy to be here. Yeah, it's really exciting, very, very cool, and lots of overlap in it sounds like the same sorts of questions framed slightly differently here and there are coming up again and again. So I think that yeah, I think this is a really productive, great idea. So I'm gonna do something completely different here. I'm talking. My aim today is to basically suggest that live sound studies as a discipline should attend to the work of local stagehands as an integral part of large-scale productions. So what I'm talking about here is how large-scale productions rely on locally hired stagehands to do load-ins and load-outs, basically. There are a host of other things that local stagehands do, but this is mostly what I'm thinking about when I'm talking about this. The load-ins and load-outs in particular. Of course, there are running crews that are composed of local stagehands as well, but I'm mostly thinking about load-ins and load-outs here. So I'm going to provide a little context of what I'm talking about, talk a little bit about why and how local stagehands are devalued in a labor context to the point of sometimes being literally invisible, and then talk about maybe how a few strategies, a few ideas on how to include local stagehands in ethnographic research going forward. And if there's time, I'll give some examples of stuff that I've come across in my own research, but maybe we can save that if I'm running over. So my ethnographic fieldwork is on is with touring sound technicians, and specifically with Cirque du Soleil arena shows. And what's interesting about Cirque du Soleil, sorry, 1 second, it's asking me if I'm speaking Spanish. Okay, sorry about that. Yes, so what's interesting about Cirque du Soleil in particular is that it's a theatrical performance. So there is that theatrical design paradigm, that standard that hides technology and technicians from audience members as a point of as a starting point for design. But it also is this huge multinational company where it follows a neoliberal, late capitalist labor paradigm that correlates, a lack of an apparent lack of specialization, I should say, with worker anonymity and replaceability. So it has these two means. Cirque du Soleil has these two means of hiding technical workers, and it does it readily as a company and as a production company. So the two themes that I want to focus on here are ones that have come up in sound studies, that come up in conversation here today already a little bit. So the first is invisible labor, backstage labor, worker erasure in particular. So here I'm thinking about all of the ethnographies about recording studios. A lot of them talk about the invisible labor, the invisible creative labor of the engineers that are collaborating, etc., with the musicians and artists. Also thinking about the literature that talks about studio technicians and computer technicians and computer programmers as collaborators with composers, or who are composer programmers. So thinking about that literature as well, and then all the sociological stuff about backstage and behind the scenes workers. Howard Becker that Andy was talking about, of course. So all of this stuff, I'm thinking about all this stuff when I'm thinking about this invisible labor or worker erasure that takes place at the corporate level. I'm also thinking about another typical thing to talk about in sound studies, that decentralizing the role of music as the study object. Kyle Devine talks about musicology without music, for example. And so I'm thinking about that idea and trying to think about live sound studies without the live sound, or live sound studies without live sound technicians, for example. Just extending that notion. And again, this is I'm specifically thinking, especially thinking about load-ins and load-outs here. So yeah, some quick context about local stagehands. For the vast majority of local stagehands that I've encountered on tour all over the world, they are precarious workers, they're gig-based, waged laborers, and nameless mass of people hired from wherever, by whomever, to come and push and pull and lift and load and then disappear. Maybe we don't even know their names as a touring crew. Yeah, so these are workers who are devalued again in a number of ways in late capitalism, thinking of them as unskilled or underskilled labor, thinking of them as entirely replaceable. This changes a little bit when we look at unions, but there are workers, unionized workers who have a stable job, say a 40-hour minimum with a particular venue, a 40-hour weekly minimum for a particular venue, I should say, are very, very rare. Less so in the United States, but elsewhere in the world, it's a fleetingly rare role. Say the head of sound, one head of sound, and maybe one assistant head of sound at a particular venue, for example. But the discourse around unions, union workers are devalued for a couple of reasons in live sound studies already, and by obviously late capitalism and the touring paradigms that are in place. So one of the ways they're devalued is by talking only to production managers and promoters who view unionized workers as being too expensive, of course. Another thing that comes out of those conversations by talking only to production managers and promoters and touring crews, for that matter, is the slow, arrogant, lazy, pedantic, difficult to work with union worker. That comes up throughout conversations all over the place. Then there are yeah, there are also volunteers who are part of our the sort of local stagehand umbrella. But yeah, that's less of a large scale thing. That would be more of a independent theater or a local festival sort of thing, in my experience anyway. So yeah, thinking about strategies to include stagehands in ethnographic research. Here, these are just sort of, yeah, brainstorm ideas. I've done some of them in my own work. I've not done most of them. These are ideas for mostly just future research and future research design. So obviously, a way to do some of this work is to do interviews and focus groups and surveys with local stagehands through union chapters, or through their stewards, or through forums, or through department heads at venues. Looking at archives as well. The IATSE, the big union in North America, has been around for well over 100 years now, so their archives would be rich and vast. The AFL-CIO, another big labor organization in the United States, they would have a big archive as well. That would touch on all of, well, I mean, they work with a lot of labor groups, of course, but they would work closely with, they would have a valuable archive of stagehand work as well. Public intercept interviews. These are short, snappy, anonymous, easy to record, quick 2-3 questions that could be addressed to a local stagehand during a load-in or during a load-out. You could, while you're putting the front of house snake in the box, you could pose these questions. It'd be no problem. And the benefit here is that those, because they're anonymous, because they're quick, that is an easy ethical clearance for anybody at an institution who well, does ethics proposal or ethics clearance through that work. Then, of course, talking about where stagehands aren't, I think, would be another really interesting way into this research. So looking at where local stagehands are too few or absent entirely. And here I'm thinking about low budget productions like local festivals, or like independent theater, or even theater schools, or technical schools. But also where, looking at communities that are absent from call lists. I'm thinking of people of color, women, LGBTQ, non-binary, gender non-conforming people. The AFL-CIO, for example, had overtly racist hiring policies not that long ago. So, and that would be tangible, that would be visible in their archive, for example. Yeah. Then yeah, that's all I've got for a sort of a quick overview. Maybe I'll do one quick example and then conclude with that. So one really fun example that I draw on in conversation all the time, of a local stagehand who I met and worked with on tour, who transcended all of these modes of devaluation that local stagehands encounter in productions, was a middle-aged guy, quiet, lovely to work with, calm, you know, just did the thing and knew, you know, was obviously experienced, but he also seemed to be just doing this on the side, the occasional load in and load out because he'd just been around for a while. And in that particular venue, the touring production needed a running crew, so he was part of that running crew. He just happened to be part of that running crew. And so during the week of shows, we got into conversation with this guy, and it turned out that he designed and manufactured, like built by hand, the headphone amps that we used on stage on that production. And the headphone amps that Cirque du Soleil uses in all of its productions. Almost all of the headphone amps on all of the shows used by all of the musicians were made by this guy who was like stacking empties and pushing them into the truck. And what's interesting here is that despite the narrative of this unskilled, replaceable worker, he was eminently knowledgeable, eminently experienced, much more knowledgeable and much more experienced about this gear that we ourselves as touring crew had worked with day in and day out for years. This guy could run circles around us, you know, while we were asking him to, you know, tape down the cable or, you know, whatever, doing the normal stagehand stuff. So anyway, that's just one anecdote, but it's illustrative, I think, of this whole world that opens up when we as ethnographers open ourselves up to a broader picture of what it means to produce these shows. Thanks.
All right, Jacob, thanks. That was fantastic. All right, we've got one more talk in this panel. So I'd like to welcome Jennifer Jester.
Hello.
Hello, Jennifer. Dr. Jennifer Jester is a musician, educator, and music therapist, and has been teaching at Millersville University for 8 years, including directing 8 commercial bands. Her career in performance and live production of shows spans over 25 years, and she performs regularly in her jazz group, Dr. Jester and the Kings of Swing. Her talk today is entitled Harmonizing Complexity, Advancing Best Practices in Large-Scale Educational Show Production.
All right. Let's set my timer here. Hello, everybody. It's nice to be here. My world is a little bit of, I'm not necessarily a philosopher. I'm more of a, I don't know, educational show creator, performer, musician, but I also happen to teach live audio. And some of my background, let's see, is that I'm trying to include a large number of students in the past 10 years in particular. My question has always been, how can I serve all students, but also have higher quality musical experiences? I'm kind of one of those people that tries to do the impossible. And so this sort of, this took me into this direction of asking, could there be some best practices in this area that translate to other engineers in other educational settings and more complex festival setups? I come at this, I'm a former School of Rock franchisee, owner, manager, janitor, and their model is to have shows with between 18 to 21 students. So you're in one show, it might be like a one-hit wonder show. You're basically, their model is every song is a new band, this was my first introduction to engineering nightmares, for a lot of reasons. When you have kids that sing like like they're they're whispering. The other, because of that experience, then I fast forwarded to my time with Millersville University, and my time in Millersville has been broken up. I had 4 years, 10 years ago or so, and then now 4 years, this past 4 years. So I teach all the commercial ensembles. In the past, they had, 5-person bands, and it's really cute, and maybe 15, 20 people could participate. But we have a lot more people in our music industry program. It's growing. Currently, there are 70 students in the program, about 10 students per band. So you can imagine how large those are to navigate just with one band. I also teach live audio 1 and 2. Up the street about 30 minutes is Rock Lidditz. And so a number of our students want to work at Clare Global. We try to prepare them, and I work with Dave Lester at Clare to just sort of create experiences and make my curriculum up to snuff before they are even kind of considered to go into their roadie program. So I wanted to just give a couple brief examples of show types. I initially approached this symposium as like, okay, how can I do something philosophical? I'm more of a nuts and bolts, how do I get it done kind of thinker and presenter. So I'm trying to fit in also with the philosophy of it. So I had intended to actually have like a bunch of people done some interviews and researches, and I come back here today with like a best practice list. The reality of that is that it was Christmas time. I had a much larger ambition than possible. I did get one interview in, and so this is sort of like my pre-presentation before maybe going forward, and maybe you all can poke some holes in it or tell me, hey, go a different direction or whatever. So I'm very open book here. I just wanted to share kind of my thoughts. So this was like a School of Rock show. This over here is like the song lineup that they might have. You've got 15 students. Usually it's between 4 to 6 singers, constantly moving microphones. Every song, the students are also multi-instrumentalists, which is very much encouraged. But again, another sound person nightmare. You might have one drummer that bangs the heck out of the drums, and another one that's maybe a girl that just doesn't hit as hard, which is great fun. Also, there's usually limited dress rehearsal time. You might get 30, 40 minutes if you're lucky, an hour before the venue lets you in and you do the show. So it's always very fast, never enough time, and yet you're trying to make the best show possible. This one is where I'm at right now with Millersville. We do a total of 2 shows a year, but these are our large festival style shows at a venue down the street. That's a long show. This past fall, we had 4 to 9 p.m., 10 bands, 8 to 10 band members, again, mostly instrumentalists, vocalists, switching parts, never one singer. It's always like one with like 2 or 3 part harmonies. And then we also have a virtual instrument band with laptops and computers. So like a totally different stage setup for that. 6 singers and 20-minute sound checks for each group because of what the venue wants. And we've also, like, I have a student that works with Stray here in the Lancaster Lidditz area, and he helped us come up with this input list grid, which I think is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Just like each of these column names up here are names of the bands, what their inputs are, so that we do sort of a master input list, and then that way that me or whoever the engineer is, or sometimes it's my students, can know like what's coming up. And this really started me on a question of talking to different engineers of like, how do you approach this mess? So this was my plan, conducting interviews. I wanted to hear from people that did educational types of things. There's, I don't know, 250 School of Rock franchises, I think, in the United States that are all doing these kinds of shows. When I've talked to some other people outside my circle, they thought this was a great idea because it's usually like flinging mud on the wall. And so it's kind of like, I wasn't sure if there was some kind of way where people organize these kinds of shows. What's a norm? What are challenges and that kind of thing. Let's see. Okay. These were the question categories, and I'm gonna go kind of fast. It looks like I've gone 7 minutes already. So these are some of the detail questions of like what I found with the first interview is that some of these are redundant. So I'm gonna probably like condense it down. It could take about an hour to fill it out. I don't want that. I want it to be much easier, but just like how do you prep, that kind of thing. Day of show mixing, like there's a, you know, do people have a scene for every show? Do they just use one scene for all the shows? There's different schools of thoughts depending on who I've talked to on that. And then like collaboration and setup prior to the show were in there. Quality control during the performance. How does this feedback influence future practices? So I tried to just think of like, and especially this organizing the mixing board as somebody who teaches live audio. It's like, you know, how can I use something like this in my class so that people can go out prepared and have sort of like a way to tackle the monster. So quickly, here's some results that I kind of condensed down. Chris Jackson is our technical coordinator from Millersville, and he does basically almost all the shows, and we work with him intimately during these shows. He's been doing sound live in studio for 15 years. This is our equipment setup within our space that he's referring to, if you're familiar with these kinds of things. We again send him stage plots and the input list kind of similarly to what you saw earlier for the pre-production. And then he does some of these organizational types of things around the stage plots, like just trying to get microphones, every detail. He puts a lot of time into this, and I've been in situations where there wasn't that possibility, like if we had shows with School of Rock at bars or there are different things, and so it was more flyby. So we're definitely very lucky to have somebody that puts this detail in. The stage plots, I mean, basically like the advanced show preparation is super critical. Day of show mixing, this was the area that I'm probably most interested in, of like how do you navigate this with routing and grouping and just the nuts and bolts behind it. And so a lot of it is presetting. Also, there's always something that we've forgotten, like, oh, there's one more DI needed, and you know, like, oh, this kid has a upright bass that he's now bringing that we just found out about. So there's always something, but always planning for extra inputs. And then collaboration, just attitude, like saying yes, having working with the students. He has a great team with like us together. We make a great team, and basically it's making it happen no matter what, which I think is the way that everybody goes. But quality control, he also works with trying to have a DB meter and RTA set up. They also do all the ringing out beforehand, all that stuff that makes sense and avoids the feedback issues. Also some post-show analysis. So I liked how he kind of adapted my questions to be like sort of a pre-show, during show, post-show. and then what kind of adaptations. And then again, organizing the mixing board in 8-channel sections and scenes versus no scenes. And he's one that likes to have the scenes different for the bands, even if there's not enough time to have a proper sound check and go through the entire show. That's the preference that he in particular uses. As far as like forward thinking, like with the students, basically need for hands-on experience in this kind of setting. This is kind of similar to what it was come up with finding low pressure gigs for skill development before you throw them into the fire. There's no way I'd have any of my live students completely run a show like this at this point, because it's too critical for it to be really good for administrators and parents and that kind of thing. So that's basically it. That's the start of the thoughts. I'm definitely open to any suggestions because I'm new to researching in this area, but hopefully I can create something that might be helpful for engineers in these settings.
Guys, those talks are fantastic. And together we get a really great sense of the whole span of a live production, from the labor of loading in and taking out and setting up to the planning and preparation, the complex planning and preparation required, even at the most basic level. Even just, I work in a high school, so I get involved sometimes with some of the band stuff, and so I'm familiar with this kind of thing. And my kid's been to the School of Rock. But and then onwards to the engineering tasks. So thanks a lot. And I think we probably have some time for a discussion. So let's open it up to some questions if we have any. I'm sure we do, right?
Yeah,
Anybody?
Nick, it's Jos. Yeah, hey, thank all
bud.
three of you. I just have this thought that is, I'm afraid, not more a thought than a question, but it's this, this coming together of how do we learn this stuff? How do we teach this stuff? We've already seen how different these sound roles are in many different contexts, making it really complicated to deliver a full-fledged sound people after a tertiary or even more modest than a tertiary education. Or if you're an aspiring, you start as a stagehand and you want to grow into those more senior roles. And but I remember quite distinctly when I started, I did a recording course with a lot of live sounds at the conservatory, like quite at a quite high level. But then I started touring and doing lots of festivals, and like everyone had to start from the very bottom. The thing that went wrong at these festivals is that they would generally pick the youngest, the newest crew member to do the patching on stage. And because, patching's not cool. Mixing monitors, that's cool. Patching's not cool. So at all these pretty obscure festivals, we'd end up with the patching not working. So there's no signals in the monitor desk and no signals in the front of house desk, and you're all yelling into a walkie-talkie or to a microphone, like, why is the kick not in channel 1? And so then we had this great insightful moment where we said, well, let's just put the most senior person on the patching. So at least we have the more junior people have something to stuff up, rather than being very senior and have no signals to stuff up. So that was my thought, that sort of connects these things together, and what a weird environment it can be.
It's kind of funny. I've seen the same thing. You end up with like, hey, just go do this thing, and it seems like a low ranking job, and then it's the thing that everything else hinges on, and the whole show goes off the rails when it's not done right. It's a weird attitude. Yeah, it seems. I mean, it's similar in the studio too. I've found, oh, go set up all this stuff and patch it, and then you spend an hour troubleshooting because that was a more complicated job than anyone gave it credit for.
Yeah, and I think something that leads to that attitude is that we often also not sure if you're in a more experienced, more senior position or a more glamorous position, you're not really sure how you got there. It's ultimately there's a combination of education, experience, and luck, and being the right person at the right time. So how are you then? You always have imposter syndrome in all of these roles. There's always going to be who's better than you, who's going to take over your job as sound one or as the mixing engineer of this great gig, or you're going to be demoted to be the better to be the better one. So it's and that then to respect that we like you in all these presentations we still have so many questions about how do we teach this stuff, how do we what skill set do you need, and at the same time we also know that then you have this technical skill set, but the real skill set is your ability to communicate to the other stakeholders, communicate to the musicians, to the venue management, to all the stuff that's thrown at you on a concert day. So there's so much room for this kind of research and unpacking and developing new tools to teach that. Yeah, great. Sorry, I'm still not asking questions. I do apologize.
Something that I can't figure out, that's not a question for any specific person, but I'm just dying to know if somebody has cracked this particular nut. I find that there's a contingent of students who want to do something. They want to be operators. I want to operate this machine, and that machine might be a mixing console or a lighting board or a musical instrument, but there's an outlook of like, it's a thing, you pull the lever and something comes out, and it's sort of that formula. And I thinking about what you said, how do you end up where you are? The thing that I keep coming back to is there's like an intentional thoughtfulness that tends to be present in the people who are the directors of the departments on a big tour or at a venue or whatever, where when there's a problem, it's not just the lever's broken, I can't pull it and get a show out of it or whatever this machine makes. It's okay, we got to be thinking about this problem and what happens there. And I don't know how to, even with the system that we're building, it to a certain extent allows you to react to a thing in a predictable way and give you a cookie, give you a treat, but it doesn't really push you to think. And that's, I think, the biggest differentiator is even if you're all you're doing is patching, you should go home tired at the end of the day, not physically, but mentally, because you were thinking about what you were doing the whole time. And sometimes that part just is like impossible to convey or to sell to a younger professional or student.
Brett, one thing that I thought about as you were just speaking was that these kinds of shows would be a really interesting thing if we could collaborate and we video record and you get all the audio from this mess and then put it in your scenario, because it's like everything's flying at you. Oh, the singers are, oh good, like can't hear this, hear that, so it'd be like an advanced mixing, so that like it would be like it sounds like you need a library
yeah
things, and so if we could help in any way.
And it's like that sort of like festival sort of show where it's just fast and furious, and by the time you figured out one thing, it's already on to the next. Like those are incredibly challenging shows for me, at least. I'm sure better folks than me will fly through them, but yeah, it's such a whirlwind. But the challenges of planning and configuration, that's another thing that I don't know how, in the long run, I'd love to have, if everyone works on desks that are smaller than their number of inputs, right? Like, unless you're living a much better life than me, you're limited to whatever, 16 faders, 12 faders, 8 faders, 24 faders, 32, but like you're using a lot more going in and out of the desk. And even that like simple process of like, where do I want to put this, because I'm gonna have to switch pages, and some consoles do have like a money fader that you can lock in place, some don't. Thinking about that is just a a whole different thing than, I mean, I didn't have to think about that when I started. It was just, I got X number of faders and put it where I put it and it doesn't matter. And now it's like a whole new complexity added on top.
Well,
Yeah,
it may
it's-
be that
yeah.
kids today are not going to struggle with that to the extent that dinosaurs like us will. I know that, I trained on analog consoles, and the way we got around some of these problems was that my recording school was such a rundown piece of crap. There were faders that didn't work. The tape deck had to be aligned every time before you recorded. You routinely ran into these situations during recording sessions where you had to think outside of the box to make something happen. So that was built into our training. And I still wasn't prepared to go out in the real world and deal with the situations that I faced the day after I graduated. So I think what you're talking about, your system looks fantastic. And I really, but the question you pose is a really good one, because some kids are really going to struggle with the heat of the moment type stuff where you don't have a pre-planned solution to a problem, and you have to think around it, and different types of people learn in different ways. And for me, those things are very different. I don't map large schemes conceptually well in my head. My first gig out of recording school, my friend called me the very day that I graduated. I had 1 year of training, and he said, "I'm supposed to work with MC Hammer tomorrow. I can't make it. Can you do it?" So my recording school partner and I said, sure. We drove from San Francisco down to Menlo Park, showed up at a studio that had only been half built. There were wires pulled out of the patch bay. The monitors weren't connected. A gospel choir showed up, and then the guys were like, "We want you to record the choir so that Hammer could start rapping." And I had to like flip the monitors out of phase so that the choir could, and luckily my partner in recording school was much better student than I. So between the two of us, we managed to pull it out of our butt. But I wasn't prepared for that. And, if I was there by myself, I would have had a nervous breakdown, and I would have quit and never come back to the business.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how you can train for those type of situations without being thrown to the fire. And, in athletics, we break down these complicated situations. I coach lacrosse. I may have heard that earlier, but when I went from high school to college, things were much faster. All of a sudden, everyone was as fast and as good as an athlete as me, but they were also much smarter, and I had more training. Everything was coming at me so fast. And the way that we prepare kids for that now is that we take a complicated game situation, we break it down to a smaller situation, and we let kids go in small groups and just have a degree of free play. And in those small groups, anything can and will happen. And we don't yell at them and constantly give them instruction, but random things happen, and they have to improvise and react to them. So that's something to think about when you're designing this and thinking about these situations, is throw some randomness into it and give them room to make mistakes, is essentially what I'm saying. Yeah.
Nick, without taking over, but I think we need to round up to have a little break before we
Sounds good.
before we go into
May I just ask both Brett and Jennifer, if you guys are planning to share this stuff, and if so, how, and more importantly, when?
Yeah, I'm definitely planning on, I'd love to make this, as this develops, an open source thing. I think there's some folks, especially at an academic institution, you got to hide it. It's your thing. It's your whatever. I'm like, dude, this makes every bit of live music, live sound, whatever. It's going to help us all. So, yeah,
Awesome.
that's my plan. And I'll happily, be in touch with people as things are progressing.
Great. Yeah, we'd love to be involved.
I think my answer, Jacob, would be it might be about a year. I need to, my thing is that I need to identify people that are in these settings that would provide value to the research, So I want to ask all of you if you know people that kind of work in these crazy settings that you think might be a valuable source. And I'm, after having my friend Chris go through this, like he spent quite a long time filling out it was over Christmas, and he typed out responses, and I think it's too long. And so I need to condense it so that if it is written responses, it's shorter, or if I need to do interviews and just transcribe it, the old fashioned way, and then do qualitative types of things, I can do that. But that's where I'm at. I need to like really condense it so I don't take too much of people's time. So any help, welcome.
Awesome, thanks.
It is good news that these projects will see the light at some point. So